There's one thing that you, and by you I mean every single one of you watching today. There's one thing I know for sure about you that you don't like and you want to avoid by all means. And if you happen to face it, you just can't wait to get out of it. Do you know? Do you know what that is? Here it is. Crisis. Yes, that's right, crisis. As a human, it's quite natural and instinctive to avoid crisis, isn't it? But what if I tell you today that crisis has the potential to benefit you and me in ways unimaginable? And that is why today, in part 2 of our series called Emerging Better and Stronger, we will address the second question, and that is this. Why should we persevere in times of crisis, in tough times? Why should we persevere? Why care about persevering? Why don't we just let go? Why don't we just don't care about it? Just go through it. Don't think about too much. Just wait for it to be over. But why should we actively and consciously persevere in times of crisis? And here's my proposition for today's message. You see, because we may not like when we go through a crisis. Of course, none of the crisis, we would like when we go through. But you see, we may like when we see the benefit it produces. All right? How confident am I in saying that? Well, quite a lot. Do I truly believe that? Yes, I do. And here's my reason why I believe and why I am fully confident in this. And that is because James, and not anyhow any James, but the very brother of Jesus, James, he says so. And he explains to us his reason why we should persevere in tough times, in times of crisis, in his letter to the first century Jewish Christians. But let me give you a heads up before I show you what James says, because it may seem that what he says is irrelevant to you and me because he doesn't know anything about us. He doesn't know about our circumstances. It is something like someone just come to you and tells you something like, hey, come on, you are afraid. You are afraid for nothing. You are thinking too much. You are just worried for no reason. Why are you so scared? You shouldn't be worried. You shouldn't be freaked out like that, And they say like that. They say these things to you without having a single clue of the crisis you are facing. So can you imagine someone telling you like that? I mean, you will brush him off or brush her off right naturally. Of course, you don't know what you're saying. You don't know my situation, and you have no right to just come and tell me, don't worry, just go through, that kind of stuff. And that's something, I think that's something that you might feel when you hear what James has to say about persevering in times of crisis. But hey, don't switch your channel, all right? Hang in there until the end because you don't want to miss the gem that James will bring about in his letter. All right? So this is what James, the brother of Jesus, says. Whenever you face trials of many kinds, whenever. Now, James didn't say if ever. That's something different, right? Instead of saying if ever, James said whenever. Why is that important? Well, that is important because it means that all of us will face trials, that all of us will face crisis in life, irrespective of whether you believe in God or not. But why is that so? How come like that, right? It's not fair. It doesn't sound fair. Now, remember in part 1 of this series, we mentioned that when sin entered into the world and into the human nature, it brought along something, right? What did it bring? It brought along suffering, pain, and death. Right? And that is why trials or crisis in life is not a question of if, but it's a question of when. And that's why James says whenever you face. It's not if you face, but when you face. And come on, some of you watching today could testify to that, right? Because you might be right now in the middle of a crisis, right? All of us will face crisis along the way in our families, in our workplace, and so on. And James uses an interesting word here to describe crisis in our lives. He said, whenever you face, whenever you come across, whenever you face. Now, this word face, whenever you face, this word face means taken by surprise, taken by surprise. Of course, there are some crises we face. They are kind of expected, right? You know that, because you did something wrong, you are expecting a crisis or an issue out of that. But let us also admit the truth that there are crises that take us by surprise, isn't it? For instance, COVID-19. I mean, nobody expected COVID-19. Nobody expected the extent to which COVID-19 would affect the whole world, isn't it? And so, this is what James is saying. When crises come and take you by surprise, I want you to know, I want you to do something very specific. Whenever crises take you by surprise, I want you to do something very specific. And James is telling us, I want you to do this thing. I want you to consider it. Consider it. Don't emote first. Don't react with your emotion first. But consider. And consider here, the word consider means to rethink or to readjust your perspective about crisis. Adjust your perspective to what, right? Then James tells us, adjust your perspective of your crisis, of your trials, to being as a source of great joy, because James says, consider it as pure joy, my brothers and sisters. So this is what he's saying. Rethink or readjust your perspective about the crisis you are facing as something that you can be joyful about, as something that you can be thankful for. I mean, seriously? I mean, really? But that just doesn't make any sense, right? How can a crisis, how can a trial be something to be joyful about? And not forgetting to mention again that James doesn't even know the crisis we face. And he's saying, no matter what your crises are, I want you to do this thing. I want you to, I want you to be joyful. It's like James is telling us, I may not know what you are going through, but whatever you are going through, the crisis that you are going through, I'm telling you, you have a great reason to be joyful. It's like, really, James? Seriously? How could he possibly say that? How is that relevant to us? Why is he saying that? And here is the reason why. Because James says, because you know that the testing of your faith, the word testing, now you know what does testing means. Testing simply means it is a process by which what? Testing is a process by which you reveal or you prove the authenticity or the quality of something or someone. So James is saying that the trials or the crisis you face is like a process by which it reveals or it proves the authenticity or the quality of our faith in God. It's like a spiritual health diagnosis. It exposes and reveals the true condition of your faith, meaning your beliefs, your convictions, your confidence in who God is. Let me put it another way. Who you are under fire is who you really are. I mean, I'm sure you know that, but why did I mention this? Why is that important? Well, it is important because when you know who you really are, you have the opportunity to change who you are, right? I mean, if you don't know who you really are, how can you go about being transformed? How can you go about changing the need that you need to change in the first place about yourself? So listen, this also means that there are things about you and your faith which you will never discover if not for the crisis that you go through in life. And that's why we need to look back. That's why we need to look back and find about ourselves, especially during the time of crisis or conflicts. So let me ask you, did you currently go through any crisis? Did you currently go through any conflicts or issues or tensions at home or at workplace or at work, and especially during the circuit breaker period, right? Any crisis or conflicts with your family members or colleagues on any matters? Now, If you can remember some, if you can recall some, I need you to recall something, okay? And that is this: when you went through the crisis, all right? How did you respond? How did you respond, or how did you react to the situation with your words, with your gestures, with your attitudes, with your postures? How do you react? How do you respond when you had those difficult times, when you had those trials, when you had those, crisis with your family members, with your friends, with your siblings, with your parents? How do you react? How was your attitude like? What were the words? You know why I ask this? Because all these things, they tell you a lot about you, and they tell you a lot about you and your faith in God and you as a Jesus follower. You see, trials or crises have a way of exposing the things that are deep beneath the surface of our lives, don't they? And God uses them. And God uses them to reveal the spiritual health deficiency in us, so that we can do something about it, so that we can grow, so that you and I can grow out of it. See, God uses them to reveal the deficiencies in our spiritual maturity. It's not just for information's sake, but so that we can do something about it, so that you and I can grow out of it. Have you seen anyone who, because of the trials or the crisis he or she faced, became a changed person, became a better person, became a more mature follower of Jesus? Have you? Well, that should be your story, isn't it? That should be my story. Because we all face various kinds of crises in life, don't we? And that is why James tells us why we should consider the trials or crisis we face as a source of great joy, because in those difficult times, our life looks like a lemon that is being squeezed out, whatever is inside, right? And when that happens, we have a choice to either say, oh, it's too sour, and you throw it away, or you can make an icy lemonade and enjoy the drink. What do you think? So, whenever you face trials or crisis, consider it as a source of great joy. As a source of great joy. Why? Because they test your faith in God. They test your faith in God, and this testing, James continues to say, this testing of your faith produces something for you and for me. It produces, James tells us, perseverance. Yes, that's what your crisis can produce for you and for me, perseverance. What is perseverance? Perseverance is the tenacity or the ability to keep doing, right? To keep on moving forward under pressure or under stress. But perseverance is not the goal of trials or crises we face in life. No. The goal is not to make us more patient Christians. Or the goal is not to make us Christians with high tolerance level. Although that would be good, and that should be our objectives as we change. But how do we know that that's not the goal that James is telling us? Because James explains to us, it says, let perseverance finish its work. There you see. Perseverance stands, let me say this way, perseverance stands in between the reality of crisis and the reward of crisis. Perseverance is a means to an end, not an end in itself. So what is the end goal then? That's what James tells us next. let perseverance finish its work, right? So that is the purpose statement. So that what? You may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So that you may be mature and complete. Maturity, yes, that's the goal. Do you know why we don't grow spiritually mature just with an increase of Bible knowledge or by what we know about God? Is it because it is because that's not the way to grow spiritually. You and I only begin to grow spiritually mature when you experience God and His faithfulness in the midst of crisis or trials. Why? Because that's where your knowledge of God intersects with your experience of God. Because that's where your knowledge of God intersects with your experience of God, and without that, we may hardly grow. We may hardly grow in our characters. Our behaviors may hardly be changed or transformed into the likeness of Christ. And this is why some of the greatest Christians who have significantly grown spiritually mature are the ones who understood exactly what James said in this passage. And in every trial and crisis they faced, listen carefully, because this is the determining factor of what you will become as a result of facing trials or crises. Every trial or crisis these so-called great Christians faced, they persevered on. They persevered on until it finished its work of maturing them. Spiritual maturity. That's the goal. Spiritual maturity. That's the reason why trials or crises in our life should be a source of great joy for you and for me as Jesus followers. And I want to emphasize again about spiritual maturity. And that is this. Spiritual knowledge is not spiritual maturity. Spiritual knowledge is not spiritual maturity. Yes, there is a place for spiritual knowledge, but that's not spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity is about changed lives. It's about changed people. Spiritual maturity is about changed character and behaviors in us. Spiritual maturity is about becoming better people. It's about becoming good practitioners and great imitators of Jesus, His teachings, and His life. So let me wrap up. Let me wrap up everything that I said by saying this. Our trials or crises are like obstacle course. Right? Our trials or our crises in life, they are like those obstacle course. In an obstacle course training, we create different obstacles to overcome, right? For example, climbing a high wall or crawling under barbed wires or under the tunnel, or jumping or running across, balancing, swinging from one end to the other end, and so on and so forth. And listen, each obstacle is strategically created to train different parts of the physical body. And so likewise, the trials or the crises we faced are like spiritual obstacle course. Yeah. And God uses them to train and transform our characters, our behaviors, our attitudes, our perspectives, and everything about us from inside out. And that is why you and I, and that is why we should persevere in times of crisis. So next time, when you face a crisis, Tell yourself that you are simply taking part in an obstacle course for spiritual maturity. I think that is not just a fresh perspective, but that is the accurate perspective as Jesus followers. All right? Do that next time. So let me close by reading a portion of this song from Andraé Crouch, an American gospel songwriter and singer. He went through a great deal of trials in life. And in one of those moments where he was going through a trial period of time in his life, he learned a great truth. And as a result of that, he wrote this song called Through It All. Through It All. And I like to read a portion of this song to encourage all of us to persevere on in times of crisis, so that we too can emerge better and stronger from the crisis. This is what Andraé Crouch writes. I thank God for the mountains, and I thank Him for the valleys. I thank Him for the storms He brought me through. For if I never had a problem, I wouldn't know God could solve them. I'd never know what faith in God can do. Through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in Jesus. And so can you, and so can I. May that be your story. May that be my story. May that be our story, emerging better and stronger from the crisis as we persevere on to see all of us grow mature spiritually and seeing the life being changed from inside out. God bless you.